1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome back to Season 4 and another edition of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast with the accent on Southern. As per usual, after a long extended hiatus, it seems, I am still your host, one of them anyway, Joe Mahaffey. And of course, with me, as always, is my partner in crime,
the other host, James Engelhardt. Good to see you, Joe. How you doing?
Good to see you. Happy New Year. I think we can say that for at least another couple of weeks, and then if you say it in February, it's gone too.
Once you get to Groundhog Day, it's kind of
fair.
Sailed. Yeah.
Fair. Well, so I thought it would be good for us to kind of get into this today and just sort of explain to everybody that obviously we had a hiatus. James got to go to Ireland. I did a lot of travel for work as well. And then I've had some issues with an aging parent and just things that, life happens, and we did not want to, lose the momentum on this podcast. But at the same time, we wanted to make it so it was a little bit more streamlined for us to put it together on a more consistent basis as we go into 2025. And so we met before the Christmas holiday and sort of talked about a few things, which would include just sort of changing up the format a little bit.
Yep.
And so starting today, James and I are going to, we're going to talk a little bit about the news and notes that we kind of hear in the industry. And then we're going to move to what I would call, what's really on our table. I mean, obviously that's the name of the podcast. We do want to talk about what's actually on our table, but we want to get a little bit more in depth about not so much all the games we play, but maybe pick a game or two and sort of talk about that mechanic and kind of give you that sense of, gosh, what it would be like to play this game. And then hopefully going forward, we'll be able to kind of lay out a schedule. And obviously we'd love for you to comment on the video below or the podcast application that you're on and say, gosh, we'd like to hear you talk about this game. And we're willing to take a look at that. So that's what it's going to be like going forward. So starting today, we'll get into it. James and I both have come prepared with a game or two to talk about. But first, I did want to get a couple of board game news things out of the way. Stonemaier doesn't waste any time.
No.
Setting off the year with a new level of excitement, and they have a new board game.
And they always, if you will, span some memes too, as well as everything else.
It does, and I'm thinking that really their main theme here is that you better make sure that there are eggs involved.
Yes.
And so they announced Finspan this week.
They did.
Which is another game designed by, well, it says it's Elizabeth Hargraves.
She's a consultant. She helped them. It's in the World of Wingspan.
Like the theme here, I guess it's like that, like a Star Wars story.
Right.
It's a Wingspan game. So we're excited about that. In fact, one of the news aspects of it was this announcement was so exciting it actually brought down the Stonemaier for a while, which that's probably bodes well for him. Going into 2025.
I would think, and it's and again, so many memes that were then other spans that they might see. So it's always fun to see them spawning spans. Those memes.
Well, it's funny when Mariposas was announced, the butterfly game. I really expected that to be more of a Wingspan kind of vibe than the way it was. Now, honestly, it is a much better executed game the way it is.
Yeah.
But I thought that would have been cool with all the butterfly variants, but I guess there maybe not be that many. I don't know.
Well, and the butterfly, that was AEG, not Stonemaier. So
correct.
They couldn't step on those tail.
No, I totally understand for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, it looks like it seems like part of their thinking around this was kind of bracketing Wingspan as the middle weight, and then a little bit trickier with Wormspan. I see that behind you, and making this one just a little even more friendly and easy to engage with. And I've seen people talking about the fact that I've kept fish in tanks, which is what you do with fish, for decades, and so this is the one that birds are fine, dragons, whatever, but fish. I didn't realize there was such passion for fish out there, but apparently.
If you remember in college, I had a tank in my room.
Oh, that's okay.
I had a bird in a cage, and we kept a dragon as well.
Oh, that's great.
I did have
so you've got the whole trifecta. It's awesome.
I did have the fish tank for. Yeah. So anyway, it was always fun to watch the Oscar eat the little fish.
Yes.
Yes.
Oscar's
Wonder how that will play out in Finspan. We'll just have to wait and see.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I thought it was good new announcement for the year, and nice news to say, hey, I brought down the website.
Yes, which is pretty funny.
So, well, it's not funny. It just means he's got to work on his load balancing. Jamie, call me. I can help you with that. So anyway, the other thing I just thought was interesting in the news the past couple of weeks is Super Meeple, the publisher of games like Color of Paris. It's a French publisher. They kind of have some highbrow games, and they're having a little trouble getting their space in the world. So they have started to do their own distribution, which I think is interesting because I kind of look at the board game industry a lot like the craft beer industry, and it's, distribution is somewhat limited by certain channels, and it can be very difficult to get your voice in there. And there are people like, our friend Dan Halligan, publisher of Obsession, who's kind of worked his way around it in the Shopify realm. I just actually picked up an extra copy of that recently, and it says, hey, Dan Halligan just sent you a package. Nice. So, I think that, I think that that's still the struggle sometimes as Kickstarter becomes, I don't want to say less relevant because I don't think it's less relevant, but I think it's harder to get into Kickstarter than it used to be. And then just trying to get your stuff out there so that people can access it. So just be curious to see how that impacts the industry. There's a lot of things. This industry is still very much a cottage industry. It's still driven by a lot of creatives. I mean, obviously you've been coaching a student last year on creating some content, and the OGL stuff that we were talking about a while back opened up the world for additional creatives, and we'll just have to see how that continues to play out. I don't know if you had an opportunity to look at that article and what your thoughts were.
I hadn't looked at it too much. I know that there are other companies that are having similar situations. And I know Asmodee just got bought by somebody else, so that's going to change some things. And as they continue to consolidate themselves as a distributor. But I'm also thinking, these are games that have, print runs of maybe a couple thousand, right? So you're not looking to get into the distribution channels of necessarily Target or anything else. You want something that's a little smaller, a little more boutique, as you were mentioning. So Dan Halligan, again, if it's a lot of extra work to do it all yourself, but he was pretty insistent on wanting to have, not give a cut to a distributor. And I can see if you've got other things to do with your life, he's basically doing that. But if you've got other things, you've got another job, then yeah, distribution just makes sense, right? So
yeah, and I think too, it's and then when you get into distribution, how do you get through all the noise?
Yep.
I don't know how it works per se in the small board game world. But I knew that they probably order product and they got to pay for that product within 30 or 60, 90 days.
Right.
And I don't know if they really offer something like floor planning, which is an old gimmick they would use back in the day with appliances. So you go to an appliance store, you got all these refrigerators there. There's probably, millions of dollars worth of inventory.
Right. Yep.
GE used to do a thing called floor planning where they would give you 6 months to turn the inventory. I'm just curious, it's to get that space in the KLAX in the store of your choice. You've either got to have a lot of turn, which, I know between the beer and the magic cards, that pays for a lot of space.
It does.
In many ways. So anyway.
And I'm also thinking about, Stegmaier, just to go back to Finspan for a moment, has, part of what he has done is built a community around his brand. And does these, now, because he was using Kickstarter early. I remember backing Scythe back in the day.
Sure.
But now it's we're going to drop a couple of, big notices, drive a whole lot of people to his website because he crashed it. And then go from there, right? And that's how he breaks through the noise, is having this particular brand that people are really clearly identified with. And I don't think Super Meeple necessarily has that kind of fan club. And I know this pisses off more people in the industry as well because they're like, oh, Stonemaier. But
Yeah.
So,
Well, anyway, it's, I think there's two big distributors in the US that I'm aware of. I think ABC and Alliance.
hmm
They're the boxes I see the most of anyway.
hmm
But anyway, just thought it was an interesting note. We'll have to see how that progresses. As we've kind of, I'm also looking at it from the point of view of what I've been experiencing. Here we are in 2025. It's literally been 5 years since the pandemic disrupted our lives.
yes.
I think about all the Kickstarters that I backed during the pandemic era that have just now begun to show up,
Oh yeah. Oh wow. Yeah.
and the number of things that I haven't been backing in the last year. And so I kind of wonder, how is the industry evolving in a couple of different ways? So I'll just be curious to watch. We'll kind of see what the news stories say. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on it because I do want to get to our new format, but I did want to just sort of, point that out to everybody because it's just a good reminder to always support your local game store, our friendly
Yes.
local game store, who are never
Friendly
a sponsor.
Yes. We've got several around here. Yep. Always good to take
So,
my time, go down to Boardwalk. Yeah.
yeah, which reminds me, I did
Go on,
get over the summer. I did have the opportunity to go into
Mhm.
Boardwalk, and I picked up some games that hopefully we will be talking about at some point. But I
Hey.
want to stick to our theme today. So,
Let's do it.
James and I always talk about what's on our table, and so we both brought some ideas to the table today to kind of juxtapose in our own way. So I'm going to let James get started and talk about the games that he is most interested in or that he's been currently playing. James, go ahead and take
Yeah. Sure, man. So it was the holiday season, and it seems inevitable if you have this, kind of hobby that's easily gifted. Um, so three nice, fairly chunky games. Even Fall, which I'm still haven't gotten into much. Gnome Hollow and Rock Hard 1977. The Gnome Hollow, Laura picked up for me. My wife picked up for me because she thought she would like to play this with me because it's a really very it's a little more than family weight because there's a couple of different things that are going on in it. It's a You've got gnomes running around collecting mushrooms and wildflowers and getting some bonuses along the way. But it's a tile laying game where you're making paths, little mushroom rings that are going to be a variety of shapes. You've got these hexagonal tiles with different tracks through them. So thinking something like not tapestry, but you've got, but it's like Carcassonne, except two more sides and paths going through there. And you're going to lay two of these down, try to collect some mushrooms. You can sell the mushrooms on a later turn to collect points and to maybe get some wildflowers. And so there's this also a set collection game with these flowers. But it's mostly tile laying. Worker placement, you're putting one of two little gnome meeples out they've got little screen printed gnomes on them. It's super cute. So it's very, very family friendly in theme, as well as to some extent the play itself. You're just playing two tiles, placing a gnome after that, and there you go. We've played it a couple of times. It is, if you want something that, that has just a little bit more, so you've got sort of three systems. You've got the tiles, you've got the collecting of, building your path so that you get mushrooms, the marketplace where you're selling the mushrooms, and then the flowers. It's sort of three levels. You're pulling them all together, and it's pretty straightforward that way. And it's super cute again, and it's really nice. Really, nice, smooth play. The other one, which is not particularly family friendly, although it could be, is Rock Hard 1977. Have you heard about this one?
I have not, but it kind of reminds me of Rock Band, the video game. Just the cover art, I guess.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
And the description that I read about it suggested that it might have been somewhat inspired. I don't know.
So it's and that cover art is very much reminiscent of a Frank Zappa album called "The Man Who Came from Utopia." Has a very similar kind of cover on it. It's kind of hilarious. So the woman who designed this one, whose name immediately escapes me, Jamie Foxx, I think. She was the bassist for the Runaways, whose song that will not die is Cherry Bomb. So if you've
Yeah.
heard of the,
Okay.
yep. So this is sort of about her life in 1977. So it's a worker placement game to become the hottest act of 1977. So it's kind of fantastic for because I sort of remember 1977 not very well. I was not very old at the time, but
Well, considering she would have had to come up as 1977, she would have been up against Peter Frampton.
see,
He had
but
come alive.
yeah. Oh, right. And but I think this is more underground kind of.
Yeah.
of
No, I
meta.
know. I know.
It's very
He-
fun.
yeah.
So,
That sounds.
so it's a there's a lot more going on in this one. It's a sort of medium heavy game, and it very much dives deep into the thematic setting of the game. You don't have two gnomes. You just have one. You're only one rock star. You can only be one person, right? So you're
Sure.
picking one thing in three different phases. You do something during the day, which is generally some sort of businessy thing. At night, you're going to gigs, rehearsing, that kind of stuff. And then after hours, you are going on adventures that are basically these little decks of other cards that give you some flavor text, give you bonuses of one sort or another, and there's a little set collection mini game going there too. You're trying to increase these three base stats of chops, reputation, and songs to get a recording contract, and then to take that and go to bigger and bigger venues when you're doing the gigs. It is again super thematic. If you think, well, they have this mechanism called candy, so you can spend candy to let you take extra turns. But if you take too much candy, you're gonna have to go to rehab. Oh well. And there's some things you can't do, even if you're taking candy. So you can't do 2 gigs in a night. Now, so if you start thinking, well, what could I do if I had a little extra boost? Nope, still couldn't do 2
Mhm.
gigs. So there's a lot of that felt very, very much in the like, let me think, what would a rock star do? Then I probably can do that. If they wouldn't, then I probably can't. And the rules kind of play out with that really well. And it's hilarious. I mean, if there's a pun or some sort of bad joke or some hilarity that you think about the title of this game or that might go on in the game, it's probably there. She's
Nice.
fantastic. Yep. And it really feels good for that. Yeah.
Well, I like the way you unpack that because over the break, I read, which is a real nice way of saying I listened to on Audible,
It's good.
My Effin' Life by Geddy Lee,
Oh, yeah.
the bassist of Rush. And he reads it. It's an amazing book. I highly recommend it.
Awesome.
But as you were describing this, what could I do if I had a little bit more? What happens if I go too far? And he recounts those stories, not so much within the band members of Rush, but perhaps some of the bands that they were touring with. And so it was really interesting to kind of hear a lot of that come around. And so as you were describing that, that's kind of what I was thinking of, that how it, you talk about a theme and how the theme is perhaps spot on to what they're trying to achieve. That sounds like they did a pretty good thought about that.
Yep. And it's a fantastic production. You look at the board at first and you think, well, there's a lot going on. And then you're like, oh no, I only have to pay attention to the day slot, then the night slot, then the after hours. Okay. And suddenly it shrinks quite a bit. And it feels like, oh, I've got 6 or 7 choices, but then you realize you can't pay for those things. So that's off. So you really have like 1 or 2 or 3 things to do. And it ends up being really, really smooth. There's still a couple of questions that you might want to go back to the rule book for, but it's a nice, tight, hilarious, and played, man, I think I've played it 2 or 3 times now, and getting it down to like 45 minutes to an hour once you know what you're doing and where you're going to go. And it depends on how much you want to read flavor text and sort of have a good time with that.
Well, that sounds pretty cool. Now, is there any kind of
So that's my son is, yeah. If you're hearing screams.
No, I don't hear anything.
Okay, good. Phew, good.
No, I just heard my own, whatever I did with the pop filter. So I'm curious though, when you talk about these 2 games, I mean, is there any kind of compare and contrast around them that you feel like they're alike in some ways or different in some ways? I mean, what is it about these 2 I mean, did you just bring two because you had to, or did you bring some two because you thought, well, I'm going to keep saying two, or did you bring two because you thought there was a compare and contrast opportunity?
Well, so I think there's, when we're talking about the theming of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The theme in Rock Hard 1977 goes like all the way to the bone.
Right.
Again, if you're thinking about, you've got different player powers, so you've got a little bit of asymmetry, and then you've got a manager, and you've got to pay your manager. Of course, you have to pay your manager, right? And then they give you special things if you keep them on board. So every time you think, oh, I'm going to have to do this, or you've got a job, you can you can miss work 3 times before they fire you, or you quit. And then you become a professional musician. So, and there are timing questions like, oh, let me make sure I have a record deal, because basically every job gives you $2, but the record deal will give you $2 too. So you're trying to, right?
Just out of curiosity,
yeah.
is there a part of it where you actually can sell your publishing rights to the manager?
No.
Interesting.
No, you're still
Okay.
DIY sort of,
That's cool. That's cool. I just,
man.
again, I was just that
It's
happened.
a good question.
So
Yeah. No. You could probably, after the game is over, you could do that. So it's
Expansion.
all of this, the more that you think about it and the more stuff that happens, the more it feels like this is a game built around a theme and a setting, and it just kind of absorbs all of that. By contrast, Gnome Hollow could be anything. You could make it alien races building star paths through the galaxy, and then you generate different colored crystals that you go to the galactic exchange to turn it into something else. It could, it's super sweet. And what they do to build the theme and the experience there is lots of flavor text in the rules. The game itself, the gameplay is language independent. So there's not a lot that's, there's no point you think to yourself, well, if I'm a gnome mushroom farmer, what would I do, right? So I think of these as kind of ends of a spectrum, right? Where the theme in Gnome Hollow is lightly placed on top so that we have a good time harvesting mushrooms. And I don't know, I tend to think of like when you talk about theme first kind of games, people tend to think about Fantasy Flight and the kind of American style game that's very much, we just want to put you in the headspace of this. And there's lots of weird little edge cases and maybe a ton of dice and all this different stuff. And Rock Hard seems to me to be very much theme focused, theme forward, but still with all of the juicy, fun mechanisms that you want out of a otherwise dry, soulless hero, right? So I'm thinking about these as different ends of a spectrum. I guess you could clearly go farther on either side of these, right? So you could go on, if it's a war game, where it's the Battle for North Africa that'll take you 1,000 hours to play, and every little thing is there. And on the other side of that is like not just chess but Go, where it's entirely abstracted. So I've just been thinking about this as as opposed to like putting them in boxes, right? But instead trying to think about, stretch it out a little bit more, think of a continuum along which these things exist, and thinking about the ways that a game like Rock Hard can really lean into the theming to answer questions about how the game should play. So then think about, both were fun. Gnome Hollow is much faster, very simple, stripped down kind of a game, but still fun for it. But I don't know. The theme in Rock Hard comes through so strongly that it becomes a joy just to sometimes make a bad choice just to see what happens. And Gnome Hollow doesn't really offer that kind of possibility for you, I think.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you enjoyed them very much. Sounds like you got to play with Laura, maybe even shared with some friends.
Mm-hmm.
So sounds like you got a lot of good usage out of it, so to speak.
Oh yeah, and lots of just stuff to think about. Played Rock Hard with my daughter Sky.
I've heard of her.
Yes, and she had a blast, and she's just turned 16. Had a great time with all of the hilarious double entendres and And there's a card that you can draw where you sleep with a groupie. The groupie steals your money. So lose this, but you get 2 more reputation because, hey, groupies are wanting to spend the night with you, and she just thinks
There
that's
you go.
really funny. So and they've taken, I'm guessing that there's an earlier version where it wasn't just candy, it was nose candy, and then somebody said,
You can't do
maybe,
that.
well, let's not do that. Let's maybe make it safer for the kiddos. And I'm thinking, there's not a Mormon family in this country that's going to pick up this game, but still, I see what you're doing there.
That's funny, like that.
But definitely worth checking out. And I love that it is somebody who was working on being a rock star in the 70s putting out this game. She's designed a couple of other games. She was an attorney in the entertainment industry for a while, so she's done a lot of stuff and super fun. She's also really active on Board Game Geek, so if you have questions about the game, she'll be there usually within a couple of days or so.
That's nice. I like it. I like that kind of interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's been on your table, sir?
Well, so obviously, as I mentioned, actually, before I get into that, I just want to say, over the summer, I was down near James, and we actually had an opportunity to get together and have lunch, and I actually got to meet his daughter in person. Yeah. And after having played D&D with her for a while, it was just kind of nice to meet somebody in person. So I did want to just sort of call that out and say what a nice afternoon that was.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, gosh, this lovely cold. As I mentioned at the top of the section, so the segment rather, we've had a lot of these Kickstarters show up, and usually what I would do is I'd get the Kickstarter and we'd wait till Christmas time and I'd put them all under the tree. And this year I was just like, and I'm not going to put them all under the tree. We know where they are, but I did put this one under because I felt like you had to have one representative.
Sure.
And so I had backed on Kickstarter a while back a game called Survival of the Fattest.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a Dirty Rascal game. These guys are, I believe, out of Australia.
Okay.
And they're known largely as sort of like a distributor, of like the Kickstarter. They do a lot more with supporting other games, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I may not have my facts straight 100% on that, but from what I understand, they're a really good organization in that regard. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so with that said, we had the opportunity to get Survival of the Fattest and play the game. And so let me kind of give you the backdrop. In Survival of the Fattest, you're taking on the role of a woodland critter.
Awesome.
And quite honestly, there's an aesthetic here that kind of reminds me of Everdell. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I just kind of want to set that stage. But anyway, you're a woodland critter and you have unique tricks.
Okay.
That give you tricks and abilities really that lets you forage for food in a way that allows you to build your resources. And your resources are being gathered via cards. So you get a base deck that is your tricks.
Okay.
And then you get some cards that are numbered 1 through 10. And those are actually, I'm sorry, 1 through 7. And those are the weight of the cards. So you have 10 cards in your hand. You have your 3 tricks, you have your 7 cards, and that gives you priority over foraging. And you get to forage, and there's a sort of like a marketplace. Then there's some places in the wild, and then there's a place to get recipes. And so what you're trying to do over the course of 3 seasons is gather food and complete recipes from the market or the recipes from the market, and you're gaining bonuses and victory points. And after 3 seasons, the person with the most points wins.
Okay.
But there's a catch. You also have had to have fed your critter, who on their card has a certain thing that they can eat, must eat in order to be fed.
Right.
And you have to store these things in your stash. And at the end of each season, you can then take from your stash and do the things that you need to do.
Okay.
to do these. The recipes are feed your critter.
Right.
And so this has been an interesting game for a couple of reasons. It's a 4-player game, but they give you more than 4 critters.
Okay. All right.
So there's the base story is like you have old Grizz, who's the bear. And old Grizz basically is hibernating, and these 2 bunnies, Huns and Buns. Yeah. Which is an interesting group in a minute. I'll get into that anyway. So you're trying to get the most foraging done between these two or more animals. But then they have a squirrel, they have an otter, they have a bird, they have all of these different animal pairings that give you different tricks and abilities. So this game has a lot of replay.
Sure.
And a lot of different outcomes based on what you play. So for example, the first time Dale and I played the bear, she played the rabbits, or the rabbitses, as I would say.
Yes.
And so the rabbits are twins, and therefore you can separate them and double your exposure, double your opportunity. So that has that kind of an element to it that's kind of interesting. And there's all certain tricks of the card. And then the bear, he's got certain tricks, like one's called a smash and grab, where he just goes to the marketplace and smacks and takes whatever he wants.
Awesome.
Now, there's also these trap cards that if you come across a trap card, so for example, if I were playing the bear and you were playing the rabbit and we were at the same foraging hole, and one of my cards was a trap card, and I'll talk about how you get the cards out in a minute. Well, actually, I'll do it now. So we have in our hand our tricks and our ranking, if you
number card.
And I would say I have a 7, and you would say, well, I have a 7. And I would say, well, I have a 6, and you'd say, well, I have a 6. And I would say, well, my animal's bigger than your animal, so I get to go first, and you have to deal with it. Right. Now, if I had, so there's certain rules like that. Now, if there were other animals in play, and I said, well, I have a 7, and you said I had a 7, and I said, well, I have a 6, or I have a 5, and you said, well, I have a 6, then you get to go first. Okay. But when the trap comes out, the smaller animal that has the least resource has to take the first trap into their hand. And you can get rid of the trap. There are a couple different ways. There's a couple of nuanced ways.
Okay.
But if the trap ends up in your stash, it counts as negative points at the end of the game.
Ah, okay. So there's a hot potato mechanism of getting rid of the trap whenever you can.
Yes, and then you can only hold 5 cards at a time unless you get a special ability through one of the recipes that you do.
Okay.
And so, but if you have a trap in your hand, you can't remove it from your hand, but you can recycle it. There's a nuance to that. But anyway, it limits your ability to take on cards for a period. And so there's just a lot of well thought out nuance in there. So anyway, so we played it as the bear and the rabbits a couple of times, kind of got the feel for the game.
Sure.
It wasn't that difficult to onboard, but we did have to watch, sort of a watch it played kind of vernacular. The publishers of the game actually have a really nice video that kind of walk you through how to do it, and it's on YouTube and it's on their website, and you can we'll have a link to the BGG on it in the show notes below, and you'll be able to take a look at it. But they've done a really nice job of getting that set up. And so then we decided to go back and play a different variant where I took on the otter, and I think she took on the squirrel, and all of a sudden the rules changed.
Sure.
And I think as we kind of look at it, we keep thinking like, let's play survival of the fattest skin. Well, let's again pick 2 different characters because I want to say there's maybe 8 or so in there. And so there's a lot of versatility in the game. I mean, and I have it right here. I mean, it's a chunky kind of game.
Oh, that is it's
upside down.
Yes, there we go. But yeah, no, it's a deeper box than you usually expect.
My camera continues to follow me around.
It does.
But yeah, no, it's a really nice production quality is really good. And again, it's a lot like the survival. The artwork and the theme of it reminded me a lot of Everdell because it's a card driven game.
Right. And anthropomorphic
The
animals.
resources happen to be cards as opposed to the other tactical resources. And what I failed to mention is at the beginning of each season, whoever has the most rank, if you will, gets a first player marker that's worth a wild. And that will let you do a lot of different things in terms of when you get to the end of the season, being able to feed or get a recipe out. If you've got that in your hand, that becomes a wild that you can use. It's a fruit. It could be a berry. It could be, whatever different thing that you're collecting, fish, what have you. And so it's really interesting. No, I'm sorry, not fish, but anyway, it's just really interesting the way that they've got it set up so that there's different ways that you can win. And like I said, if you get to the end and you have all these recipes done, but you haven't fed your critter, well, guess what? You still lose.
Right.
There's no, you cannot win if you have not fed the critter.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a deck building part of this as well.
Yeah, it is deck building. You start out with 5 cards. Well, actually you start out with 10 cards in your hand. You have a discard pile. You have a stash pile. And then as you run out of cards, you just recycle, you shuffle up the cards and you start over.
But the stash always remains separate, or
the stash always remains separate. Once you put something in your stash, it stays there.
Right. Okay.
Because you want to get it into your stash because that's the way you can complete the recipes and or feed the critter. And so and there's certain, like I would find a recipe that says, if you complete this, you can now up your hand count by 1. And there's another one that's like lets you upend your hand count by 2. So mitigates the traps.
Right.
Because if you have the trap in your hand and it doesn't end up in your stash, it doesn't count against you.
So, and you're not building a tableau as such. This is just hand, play them.
You are trying to, your tableau is really your recipes. You're trying to get your recipes.
Okay. And are these
to feed your critter?
And are
the recipe? Yeah. So the recipe. So if you have a recipe in your, everybody, I'd left this part out at the beginning of each season. Everybody gets a new recipe that they can stick at the top of their board.
Okay.
But if you buy a recipe from the marketplace and complete it, it goes to the bottom of your board. So there's scoring opportunities at the top of the card and scoring at the bottom. If you take from the marketplace, you get the benefit of the bottom.
Okay.
Which might be a lower number or a multiplier or some other benefit.
Okay.
And then the numbers at the top are typically larger in value and that sort of thing. So it's just a really well thought out game in the sense that you can't get into this rhythm of it's always going to be the same.
Right.
So we've been really, really pleased with it. It does, though, the version I got did come with an expansion. We have not integrated that into it, but it's typically more tricks for your characters.
Okay.
To portray. We'll kind of maybe or maybe not get into that. We'll just have to wait and see. But it was just a really nice game that kind of took us in a different direction of what we normally play, maybe.
Okay.
Mainly because, I mean, we do a lot of games where there's cards, but there's usually other elements. This was typically all card driven. And it was just really kind of plays really nicely at 2.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
We are curious to see how it plays at 3 or more.
Sure.
But I think it could be a little bit more interesting if you added another critter in there and you have that dynamic of competing for resources and such, because it's not easy to feed your critter.
Right.
And, my strategy has always been in the first season, I want to try to feed the critter and then I'll work on the recipes. Because I feel like once that's out of the way, then you're kind of off to the races. But we'll see. I mean, I think it's, Dale and I both have been able to get to the game at the end of the state without not having, both of us have been able to feed our critters each time. So it's not impossible, but it keeps that element can keep your score low.
Right.
Like, I don't think either of us have surpassed 20 yet as a score.
And what are the consequences if you don't feed the critter?
You can't win. You automatically lose.
Okay.
Yeah,
you're automatically out.
it's like you're not even qualified to be scored.
Gotcha.
If you get to the end and your critter's not fed, I'm as a 2-player game, it doesn't even matter what my score is.
Right. Okay. All right, and you're having to feed them along the way, right, or just at the end?
You have to. So at the end of each season, you get an opportunity to go to your stash and either complete recipes or feed your critter. But the critter may take certain things that you must find. And yeah, it's helpful that there is a wild card, but it's really hard to have certain things go your way because you're foraging for them. So if I go to the foraging spot and I say I have 7 and you say I have 7 and we go down and maybe I'm holding 3 rank cards and you have 2 rank cards, we take my 3 and your 2 and we pull out 5 things from the forage. Any traps go to you first because you're smaller than me, maybe.
Okay.
And then I get to pick based on my 3 cards, I get to pick 3 and you get to pick 2. And so you might lose out on what you need because of the who gets priority.
Right.
You might not have popping out what you need there. And then certain tricks you get. Like, so for example, I had a card that lets me look at the top 3 cards. And then decide how I want to put them back.
Right.
Or I can look at
little look into the future.
A number of cards and then put them in other places and decide what I want to keep there for me to get. Because there's also a situation where you might go to a foraging spot, 2-player game, you go 2 different directions. And so you're not always competing for the same resources.
Okay.
You know, and so it can be.
And so, if you had 3 or 4 players, then that would change that dynamic.
It changed the dynamic and the crowdedness of it. And so, and it would elongate the game. You know, one of the things that we like about it is that you can play it, you know, you can get it on the table really quickly. It comes with a very nice, I don't know if it's game trays or some derivative thereof, but it's very easy to organize the game, get the game on the table very quickly. Once you get the cards set up in the right order, every character, regardless if it's, you know, like I said, it's a 4-player game, but each character has 10 cards. Which makes me think they probably have an expansion in mind downstream.
Well, you said there was one in the box already too.
Yeah, so but I don't see one taking it above 4 players.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, I mean, and you can play rock hard up to 5, but that just seems anytime something says you can play 5, never play it at 5 is kind of my rule of thumb. So it looks like you've got about 7 playable characters. Is that right? So even with
sounds
4,
about right.
You can keep swapping them out each time you play.
Yeah, and I think that enhances the playability a lot, and it really gives you that level of, you know, diversity, and it also, you know, the tricks that the animals have are very much in line with the kind of animal they are.
Right. Oh, that makes sense.
You know, and so, you know, the bear is the biggest creature in this particular forest. He gets what he wants, smash, booms, you know, and so it's just an interesting kind of approach to the game. And like I said, the aesthetic is reminds me of Everdell.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm not in any way saying it plays like Everdell, not in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, no, it seems like it doesn't really.
No.
I like the there's, I don't think it's called Favor the Pharaoh, but there's a small box game, Egyptian themed, that you have. It's a deck builder, but you can only score cards at the end of the game if you put them into your, I don't know what they call it, a tomb. I think maybe the tomb. So you've got these really powerful cards that look great, but you'll never score them unless you take an action, and then you've thinned your hand out, which is kind of nice too for a deck builder, right? But also this really powerful card is now just out there for points. So I'm thinking about that in terms of the stash too. Like, I've got this stuff and having to stash it thins out your hand. It'll have the stuff that you need, but you have to make those decisions as you go when to drop it or not.
Now, there is a component to this game that I didn't really get into it yet because we haven't played it this way yet. So one of the characters is a fox.
Right.
Now, according to their website, that's a Kickstarter exclusive.
Ooh.
I don't know if that will hold or not because as the bear tends to have a lot of power because he's the biggest creature, the fox evidently has a pretty solid cunning to mitigate some of that.
Sure.
So we haven't played that as sort of like a duel type of scenario.
Okay.
That's the new popular vernacular. I've noticed that such and such duel is now.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Have I Love Cats
Thunder
duel. We now
Yes.
have Everdell
Yeah.
duel, and so
Yeah.
that's a new theme.
That's a new thing,
We've talked for years. I can say this now that we're in season 4. We've talked for years about games that play well at 2.
Yes. Because that's do a lot of play at 2.
Yeah.
So the bunnies versus bears,
Mhm.
versus bear, it seems like that works out because you've got 2 workers that you can place.
Correct.
Versus the biggest baddest. Okay, so it has those kinds of evening sorts of. So nobody feels like they're incredibly overpowered. It's
right. And it's not necessarily you're trying to be mean to each other, particularly in a 2-player game, and you have all the different options of places to go. Unless you both are fighting for a certain resource that's showing up in the marketplace or something.
Right.
Then, it's really just a matter of playing the game your way.
Right. Right. And I mean, Rockhard, the different characters you get, they all have slightly different powers, right? One of them can take as much candy as he wants, basically. Another one is super charismatic, so every time she goes and gets a reputation, she always gets 2 reputations instead of 1. So it's these kinds of things, right? Then you get a manager that changes things, and your job that changes things, and so you've got this fun little trio of things that are going to be. You've got a deck of manager cards, a deck of job cards, and you've got, I think, 10 or 12 characters, and you get little bitty cards that tell you which one you can choose from. You choose one of those. It slots into this entirely unnecessary but delightful mini amplifier that you have to assemble knobs. It does have movable knobs to track your stuff. And you know what number those knobs go up to?
11.
Oh, they do. It's fantastic. It's just wonderful. And which matches, I mean, I like these asymmetric, but not so asymmetric. You're playing Root, and everybody has to learn an entirely different game to play the game together. So it feels sort of like that. And it feels like it's sort of, speaking about that continuum, it feels closer to Rockhard than it does to Gnome Hollow, in as much as, what is a bear going to do? It's going to be the biggest, baddest, and do the thing. It kind of leans into the setting, the theming more. Of course, it's anthropomorphic animals, so who knows what a fox is going to do going to a market, but it feels more, Gnome Hollow, who knows? And so I'm interested in how that feels like the setting. It's because what you're telling me, it sounds like it is.
Yeah. I'd be curious. Like I said, we played it about 4 or 5 times, maybe, but we've only mixed up the first 2 or 3 times. You're just trying to get your head around the game,
right?
And Dale and I have a common refrain every time we're playing a game for the first or second time, and it goes like this. She says, "I don't think we're playing this right," and I'm like, "It's okay. We'll fix it in post."
Yep,
It's
exactly.
like we'll figure out after the fact. What did we do wrong? What are the rules that we thought were true that turned out not to be true? Or how do we interpret something? Because again, we've talked about this before. They can't cover everything in the book,
right?
And there's always a question that comes up that you have to try to work your way through, etc. And so
we did the same thing. It's like, we'll just keep that as a house rule till the end of the game, as long as everybody plays it the same way.
As long as it's consistent, that's really all that matters. It was interesting. Last night we were playing Azul, the Southern Palace, or the game we've had for a long time. We never really played that version, and we got through a round, and then I forgot that. Oh wait, we're supposed to be doing this thing with the bonus in the middle, and so I was like, well, we'll just start now.
Yep.
So anyway, so that's kind of what Survival of the Fattest is all about. But Dirty Rascal Games, I highly recommend you check it out. I'm sure that there's probably copies of the Kickstarter version still out there if you want the Fox.
Sure.
But it's a worthwhile check. And
I hadn't heard much about it before now, so it looks really fantastic.
Yeah, it really. I'm trying to. There was that period of time where it's like you're going through all the Kickstarters, and so the algorithm starts serving you up stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's probably how I came across it. I'd have to go back through my memory to try to figure it out. But anyway, so yeah, that's the news as it is fit to print. There on Survival of the Fattest. So in terms of for our audience, again, I would love to know, is there a particular game that you would like for us to sort of talk about from our point of view? We'd love to ultimately get into that type of groove. But in the meantime, we'll be back. We will in each episode kind of have a game or two like this to talk about. And so I'm looking forward to trying this new format out. I still want to have some news but I think just spending more time on a singular game or two that we're involved in, I think would hopefully be more in line with the name of our podcast, Lay It on the Table.
Yeah.
So
on the table, look a little more deeply, spend a little time thinking about it. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So I did want to, so moving on, I don't know if you had another topic. I did have a sort of a notable thing I wanted to bring up if unless you had something else you wanted to jump on first.
No, I'm good.
So, speaking of Kickstarter, I had, for a period of time, I had gone through a lot of different things that I backed. And one of the things that I backed was Badge Quest.
Oh, yeah.
By DM Dave.
Right.
Which I thought was really an interesting concept. I had bought the PDF, and so he had put together this whole idea of more of a more robust book. There were some 3D prints of the characters, so you could actually, play that game in a little bit more cohesive kind of D&D or tabletop role play kind of way. In fact, he originally had done it based on D6s, and then made some modifications that if you wanted to play it in a 5e way, you could, which I thought was pretty interesting. I've only done it with the D6s, but I'd be curious to try it and maybe, incorporate it into that larger type of story. So anyway, we've been waiting for the book to be published and all the things to come out. And I've backed some things from DM Dave before, and they were book related, and they got published, and there was no issue. And I'm not suggesting that there is an issue now, but he recently posted, and I say recently, I'm just trying to make sure I get my facts right here.
Sure.
So he published back in October that he had sold Badge Quest to Hit Point Press.
Okay.
And so that will change the dynamic of what we receive.
Okay.
So there's been a little controversy about it. I wouldn't say it's been a big kerfuffle, but it was the first experience. I mean, we've talked in the past about, Kickstarters that I've backed, and like that Indiegogo chess set that finally took forever to get finally got here.
Yeah. Back in 1890. So it took
exactly. Yeah. And this was one that I wasn't really worried about it. And honestly, I missed the original. I just happened to catch this a couple of weeks ago. This had happened all the way back in October. So I really wasn't, paying that much of attention.
Right.
But basically it says, to thank you for your support of the original campaign, we are offering you a gift equivalent value of what you pledged in the Badge Quest Kickstarter, which means what they're going to produce is now going to be somewhat different than what was promised in the Kickstarter. So just kind of an interesting thing. I don't really have an opinion on it one way or the other. I'm a little bummed because I was looking forward to certain aspects of it.
Sure.
But I love the fact that he is still going to be the singular creator on it. He's not abandoning the project.
Also good.
He's just, we began this at the top of the hour talking about what it's like to be a publisher or a distributor. You know,
Right.
DM Dave self-publishes a lot, like on RPG Drive-Thru and stuff like this.
Sure.
He's really kind of jumping out of that into a much larger world. And I think realizing what we've talked about previously, he needs a little bit more support. And I think that's where Hit Point Press, comes into play to support that. I mean, we've talked to our friends like Christina Stiles, who's done some DTP work to get, the RPG Drive-Thru kind of stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just an interesting evolution for your cottage industry, one-person shop, and you need more support. What are some ways to do it? And obviously, it was a very creative brand that clearly Hit Point Press said, "Hey, yeah, I think we could do something with that." Anyway, it's just
no, that's fantastic. Well, and it suggests that he's had a lot of success in these other projects, and this is at some point you're like, it's much easier if I've got other stuff that I'm doing and he does. Like I can pass this off to somebody else, and we'll both try to make some money out of it, and maybe we'll make more money by having somebody else doing some of that lifting for me. Yep.
Yeah. 100%.
Yep.
Well, check it out. Hit Point Press. I don't know much about their website. And I would also encourage everybody to check out Professor Dungeon Master's YouTube channel. He's had some videos here lately talking about, some of the challenges that people have being a YouTuber, talking exclusively about D&D.
Sure.
As well as I think he is planning a Kickstarter around his Deathbringer series that should be coming to fruition in sometime in 2025. I don't know if I can call him a friend of the show, but obviously we've interviewed him and I've had some personal correspondence with him, and we wish him well with that particular endeavor as well. But anyway, that's all I got this go around. James, anything else from you?
No, I was just looking at Hit Point Press, and there are some of these titles that I recognize: The Deck of Many Animated Things, the If I Were a Lich Man, Humblewood. So they've got really good stuff. It sounded sort of familiar, and that seems like a great place for him to end up. I think that's going to be a good match.
I could see you getting the field guide to Floral Dragons.
Hey, there you go. Wormspan meets Tussie Mussy. That's perfect.
There you go. Exactly.
Elizabeth, hit us up. We've got you.
Excuse me. Gosh.
Yeah,
love
man.
this 100-day cough. Well,
go get that taken care of.
As per usual, I'm Joe Mahaffey. I am not bored. I am bored gaming.
And I'm James Engelhart, and I hope that all your tiebreakers break your way.
We will have new episodes out approximately every 2 weeks. That's the goal. And we look forward to hearing from you and maybe suggesting what we should be talking about. Take care, y'all.
Take care. See ya.
World of cardboard and dice, where strategy and fun